Germany posting an economic contraction in the third quarter. In the Netherlands, there's news too, an unexpected far-right victory in parliament, putting a populist in position to become the country's next prime minister. Here to make sense of all of it, we've got Pantheon Macroeconomics chief eurozone economist Claus Vistesen. Klaus, it's good to have you. I wanted to start with the election in the Netherlands in particular, and whether you think ultimately this is going to be a new trend, a new wave in Europe that'll have implications for the markets and the economy.
Well, I think that the balance between sort of the right and the left in European Parliament is sort of ebbs and flows, and actually, there's never a clear trend, I think. So obviously what we're seeing in the Netherlands now is a bit of a surprise, but I think it's important to realize that, Geert Wilders' party, they only have a fairly small share of the total parliament, right? So they don't have an absolute majority. They'll have to do a coalition like they normally have to do in the Netherlands. So yes, it's a shift, but I don't think it's a shift that necessarily is going to matter for markets, at least not based on what we currently can see.
All right, so then let's get to the central bank news and the Lagarde comments. She's also going to be speaking a bunch next week too. What do you make of the tone there?
Well, so the ECB is trying to do one thing at the moment. They're trying to push back against expectations for rate cuts next year. But then, of course, as you said in the introduction, basically what's happening is the ECB is now done raising interest rates. So now there's a little bit of tug of war between them and markets. For our part, we think the ECB probably cuts rates earlier than they themselves would expect, because we think inflation is now coming down quicker than they had expected. But so far, until they get new forecast, which they will get in December, they'll continue to strike a relatively hawkish tone relative to the expectations of rate cuts next year.
What about the eurozone economy? I think everyone expects that Germany is in recession or headed there. Can the rest of the eurozone remain resilient?
So, if we define recessions as sort of 2 consecutive quarters of falling GDP, we think Germany's now there. The Eurozone is probably there as well for Q3, Q4, but it's still very shallow, right? So, it depends. If you come from the starting point that, we thought that the wheels would come off the economy, we would have a massive crisis with the energy shock and the war in Ukraine. Of course, what we're seeing now is resilient, but overall it's pretty poor, and it looks to be pretty weak at the start of next year as well. So there's not really much to write home about. It's sort of middling, not much going on. Shallow recession, but not like a deep recession.
So what does all this mean for the euro and European stocks?
Well, so right now the euro is sort of between 105 and 110, and I think that's probably fair value. In order for us to get below 105 and down to parity, we would need to see a resurgence of the energy crisis. So, we're quite happy with where it is now. European equities, they're obviously trading off of global fundamentals and global markets at the moment. Earnings have held up much better than you would have expected based on the macro data. So that's good news. I think that for European equity investors, especially if you pick out some of the sectors that are doing well, we're seeing very strong earnings momentum, despite what someone like me, a macroeconomist, would have told you like 6 months ago. So there are some good news there, I think.
Klaus, we're already beginning to see some charts looking at historical patterns. Post-populist election, things regarding tariffs and trade and GDP. Are you starting to work that stuff out in your models?
Not really. So I think right now, Europe's biggest political problems right now, from a point of view of if you go back to the Netherlands, to the election in the Netherlands, is of course that the countries can't agree on a common policy for immigration, for example, which is a big issue for a lot of populations in Europe, right? So you have the EU, but they can't agree on sort of an external border policy, which means that that becomes a problem from country to country. That's going to go on for quite a while because there is no agreement. I think what we're seeing in individual countries has more to do at the moment with sort of domestic swings and domestic politics rather than EU as such. But let's see what Geert Wilders do. He's anti-EU. Maybe he's going to push for an EU referendum in the Netherlands. I don't see it happening, but it's possible that he will feel emboldened to see whether he can get that.